Welcome to another special episode of our Mandatory Mental Liberation series, produced by Baba Jelani Bomani Dembe, founder of Majestic Mind Matters University. I'm your royal narrator, Queen Magical Melanin, for this new book overview episode titled Weaponized Whiteness, The Construction and Destruction of White Political Identity by Fran Shor. The necessity of the Mandatory Mental Liberation series at Majestic Mind Matters University lies in our focus on serving our melanin-rich culture communities. By addressing the importance of knowledge of self to produce greater self-awareness and advocating for our mental liberation, but especially for our precious melanin-rich culture children, our messages aims to combat the enduring effects of generational mental enslavement stemming from the historical trauma of the chattel enslavement of the ancestors. Our initiative seeks to empower us to break free from these harmful and unfavorable legacies and cultivate a deep-rooted sense of self-identity and unwavering resilience. In this episode, the terms Black, African American, or people of color may be used in reference to our melanin-rich culture people, born in America due to chattel enslavement of the ancestors. The use of those terms are only to express the importance of understanding the mindset of society for that time period in history, compared to our well-informed melanin-rich culture nation mindset today. Our melanin-rich culture people who are consistently reading more extensively, and for our melanin-rich culture people who stay on the go and actively listen to and subscribe to podcasts, just like these produced by Baba Jelani Bomani Dembe, the founder of Majestic Mind Matters University, in our Mandatory Mental Liberation series messages. With me, Queen Magical Melanin, your royal narrator for our open-minded melanin-rich culture people who are earnestly seeking more understanding and greater knowledge of self for true uplifting spiritual growth and empowerment. In his book titled Weaponized Whiteness, The Construction and Destruction of White Political Identity, Fran Shor delves into the concept of whiteness as a political identity and the ways in which it has been used as a tool for oppression and domination. Shor argues that whiteness has been weaponized throughout history to maintain power dynamics and perpetuate systems of inequality. One of the key points that Shor raises is the idea that whiteness is a constructed identity that has been used to differentiate and subordinate non-white populations. Whiteness has historically been associated with power, privilege, and superiority, while non-white identities have been marginalized and oppressed. This construction of whiteness has been a central aspect of colonialism, imperialism, and chattel enslavement, as white Europeans used their racial identity to justify their domination over melanin-rich culture indigenous populations. Shor also highlights the destructive nature of white political identity, arguing that it often relies on exclusion, violence, and exploitation. The belief in white superiority has led to the dehumanization and subjugation of non-white populations, as well as the justification for atrocities such as chattel enslavement, genocide, and imperialism. White political identity has also been used to maintain systems of racial injustice and inequality, as those who benefit from whiteness seek to protect their privilege at the expense of others. Furthermore, Shor examines how whiteness has been weaponized in modern politics, particularly in response to social movements for racial justice and equality. He argues that white political identity has been mobilized to resist efforts to dismantle systems of oppression and challenge white supremacy. This weaponization of whiteness can be seen in the backlash against movements such as Black Lives Matter, which seek to address systemic racism and law enforcement violence. In examining the construction and destruction of white political identity, Shor also explores the ways in which whiteness can be dislodged and deconstructed. He argues that it is essential to challenge and interrogate white supremacy and privilege in order to dismantle systems of oppression and create a more just society. This requires acknowledging the historical roots of white political identity and its role in maintaining inequality, as well as working towards racial equity and solidarity with marginalized communities. Overall, Shor's examination of weaponized whiteness sheds light on the destructive power dynamics that underpin white political identity. By deconstructing the construction of whiteness and challenging systems of oppression, we can work towards creating a more equitable and just society for all. This requires a collective effort to confront and dismantle white supremacy and privilege, and to build a more inclusive and compassionate world that values the humanity and dignity of all people. Through education, activism, and solidarity, we can begin to disrupt the weaponization of whiteness and create a more equitable and just society for all. In his article, White Supremacy's Old, New Face, Shor provides several examples. Here are just 3 of them, of how whiteness has been weaponized in politics. 1. He discusses how white supremacist groups have used the concept of white genocide to stoke fear and anger among white Americans, leading to violence and hate crimes. 2. Shor points out how politicians like Donald Trump have used anti-immigrant rhetoric to appeal to white voters, equating immigrants with criminals and terrorists in order to gain support. 3. He also highlights the ways in which politicians have used coded language and dog-whistle politics to appeal to white voters, tapping into their fears and perceptions of racial superiority. Overall, Shor argues that whiteness has been weaponized in politics to mobilize support, consolidate power, and maintain systems of oppression. Here are just 5 ways that political figures leverage whiteness as a tool for power and influence. 1. Generating support. Many political figures have used whiteness as a tool to generate support among white voters by playing into racialized rhetoric and stereotypes that emphasize their own whiteness as a symbol of tradition, security, and conservative values. 2. Maintaining control. By appealing to the fears and prejudices of white constituents, political figures have been able to maintain control and power in their positions of authority. They have used whiteness as a way to instill a sense of superiority and entitlement among white voters, positioning themselves as the protectors of their interests. 3. Justifying policies. Political figures have leveraged whiteness to justify policies that disproportionately benefit white individuals and communities, using rhetoric that portrays themselves as champions of white interests and against perceived threats from non-white groups. 4. Promoting nationalism. White nationalist politicians have actively promoted a sense of white identity and nationalism, often at the expense of marginalized communities. By emphasizing the importance of preserving white culture and heritage, they have sought to solidify their power and influence among white voters. 5. Controlling narratives. Political figures have used their whiteness to control the narratives surrounding issues of race and racism, often deflecting criticisms and accusations by positioning themselves as victims of so-called reverse racism or discrimination. They have used whiteness as a shield to protect themselves from accountability and scrutiny. Overall, the leveraging of whiteness as a tool for power and influence in politics has perpetuated systems of racial inequality and disenfranchisement, reinforcing existing power structures that privilege white individuals and communities. Political figures have historically used whiteness as a tool to establish and maintain systems of oppression in these 4 ways. 1. Creating and enforcing laws and policies that prioritize and benefit white people and marginalize people of color. This has been seen through segregationist policies, discriminatory voting laws, and housing discrimination, among others. 2. Using white supremacist ideology to justify and legitimize oppressive systems. By promoting the belief in the superiority of whiteness, political figures have perpetuated systems of white supremacy that oppress and dehumanize people of color. 3. Exploiting racial divisions among marginalized communities to maintain power and control. By creating conflicts and tensions between different racial groups, political figures have been able to divert attention from larger issues of systemic oppression and maintain their own power and privilege. 4. Promoting and perpetuating harmful stereotypes and narratives about people of color to justify their mistreatment and exploitation. By painting people of color as threats or criminals, political figures have been able to justify policies that disproportionately harm and oppress these communities. Overall, political figures have used whiteness as a tool to establish and maintain systems of oppression by exploiting racial divisions, promoting white supremacy ideologies, and enacting discriminatory laws and policies that benefit white people at the expense of people of color. The construction of white identity has played a significant role in the implementation of oppressive systems throughout history. From the rise of European imperialism to the establishment of racial segregation in the United States, the idea of whiteness has been used to justify the subjugation and exploitation of marginalized groups. This book overview will explore how the construction of white identity has been used as a tool of oppression and how it continues to shape social hierarchies and power dynamics today. One of the key ways in which the construction of white identity has been used to oppress others is through the justification of colonialism and imperialism. As European powers expanded their empires in the 16th and 17th centuries, the idea of white superiority was used to justify the subjugation of indigenous peoples in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. White colonizers believed that they were bringing civilization and progress to so-called backward societies, and that it was their duty to impose their cultural and political systems on these lesser peoples. This belief in white superiority was further reinforced by the development of scientific racism in the 19th century, which sought to legitimize racial hierarchies through pseudoscientific theories of genetics and biology. White Europeans were portrayed as biologically superior to non-white races, and this served as a justification for colonial domination and exploitation. This ideology of white supremacy laid the foundation for the establishment of apartheid in South Africa, segregation in the United States, and other oppressive systems that sought to preserve white power and privilege. The construction of white identity has also been used to justify economic exploitation and social inequality. Throughout history, white elites have used their racial identity to consolidate power and wealth at the expense of marginalized groups. In the antebellum South, for example, white slave owners justified the institution of chattel enslavement by claiming that black people were inherently inferior and suited for servitude. This allowed them to profit from the labor of enslaved individuals while maintaining their own social status and economic dominance. Similarly, in the Jim Crow era, white politicians and business leaders used racist stereotypes to justify segregation and discriminatory practices that marginalized melanin-rich culture people born in America, due to chattel enslavement of our ancestors and other people of color. By casting non-white groups as dangerous, untrustworthy, and inferior, white elites were able to maintain their social and economic dominance while limiting the opportunities available to marginalized communities. The legacy of white identity construction continues to shape social hierarchies and power dynamics today. In many Western societies, whiteness is still associated with privilege, opportunity, and social status. White individuals are more likely to have access to quality education, healthcare, and economic opportunities, while people of color are disproportionately affected by poverty, discrimination, and violence. The construction of white identity has created a system of inequality that benefits some at the expense of others, perpetuating a cycle of oppression and marginalization. In conclusion, the construction of white identity has played a central role in the implementation of oppressive systems throughout history. From colonialism and imperialism to segregation and economic exploitation, whiteness has been used as a tool to justify the subjugation and marginalization of marginalized groups. The legacy of white identity continues to shape social hierarchies and power dynamics today, reinforcing systems of inequality and injustice. It is only through recognizing and challenging the construction of white identity that we can begin to dismantle these oppressive systems and create a more just and equitable society for us as well. I'm your royal narrator, Queen Magical Melanin. We trust that you have expanded your understanding through the insights shared by Baba Jelani Bomani Dembe, founder of Majestic Mind Matters University, in our Mandatory Mental Liberation Series message, book overview titled Weaponized Whiteness, The Construction and Destruction of White Political Identity, by Fran Shor. Remember this, it is essential to honor the ancestors. We have a unique connection to the ancestors. They endured many unwarranted struggles, preserved our melanin-rich culture, and passed down invaluable wisdom through many generations. By honoring the ancestors, we pay honorable tribute to our roots and draw great strength and much-needed inspiration from the unwavering resilience and royal legacy that has paved the way for our present and future generations. Ancestral reverence is a powerful way for us to continually uphold our own melanin-rich identity, heritage, and cultural legacy. Here is an ancient Alkebulan proverb to keep in mind. If you think you are too small to make a difference, you have not spent the night with a mosquito. Remember this as well, whenever you are in the presence of anyone, saying, "They don't see color," it actually means they don't see you. As a member of our melanin-rich culture, you must strive for knowledge of self, for greater personal awareness. Always treat yourself kindly and seek to live a totally awesome and gloriously fulfilling melanin-rich culture life. So, like, subscribe, and share this very special melanin-rich culture link with everyone that you care about and that really cares about you and all of yours as well, and thank you for listening. Ashe.